We're tired of being beaten by policemen. We're tired of seeing our people locked up in jail over and over again. And then you holler, be patient. How long can we be patient? We want our freedom, and we want it now.
It is Saturday, July 18th, and the country is mourning the loss of civil rights champion Congressman John Lewis. He died last night in Atlanta at the age of 80. The speech we just showed, leaders of the March on Washington back in 1963 famously asked him to tone that speech down. He demonstrated a fire and a passion early on in his career, delivering that momentous address when he was just 23 years old. Lewis had always led the way in fighting injustice. He was one of the central figures who led protesters across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. The event was later dubbed Bloody Sunday after rampant violence broke out. Lewis became widely known for making what has been called necessary trouble. He brought that attitude to the United States Congress in 1987 when he was elected to represent Georgia's 5th District. He was often called the conscience of Congress because of his unwavering moral code. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi wrote in a statement, quote, "Every day of John Lewis's life was dedicated to bringing freedom and justice to all." As he declared 57 years ago during the March on Washington, standing in the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial, quote, "Our minds, souls, and hearts cannot rest until freedom and justice exist for all the people." Joining me now, Nikole Hannah-Jones, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist at the New York Times Magazine, Roland Martin, host and managing editor of Roland Martin Unfiltered. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for being with us. Nikole, we had planned to have you on the show today to talk about another matter, but this becomes a very important one because you have become, to some degree, a historian of our time as it relates to black people in America. And John Lewis forms an important part of that history. This is a man who at a very young age decided that he had a passion to channel, passion of youth and young people who were frustrated with the lives of African Americans. And he did that until yesterday.
Yeah, this is a particularly hard one for us all, Ali. I'm pretty emotional this morning. There was not a single living American, I think, more responsible for the rights that I have and the rights that so many Americans have today than John Lewis. And he had one prerequisite for equality, and that was that you were a human being. He was on the right side of every struggle for equality, whether it be for black rights, whether it be for gay rights, women's rights. This was a man who actually believed in the ideals of our founding creed and who fought and put his life on the line literally again and again to make this country a democracy, or as close to it as we have become.
Roland, it's interesting because he has fought for those ideals and saw some degree of success. Saw the passage of the civil rights bill. He saw himself elected to Congress. Spent 17 terms in Congress. But in the end, he is witnessing a movement that looks very much like the movement that he was involved in the 60s.
Well, that's precisely why I chose to put on this hoodie. Shout out to Cliff and Latasha with Black Voters Matter, because he understood what they were doing. And the fact that black folks today are fighting the exact same battle that he and others were engaged in, and a significant part of that still deals with voting. I know in the midst of all of this, folks don't necessarily want to be so talked about politics. But when I looked at last night, the statement of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, which I thought was a worthless piece of paper, because here's the piece. I don't want to hear any Republican today laud Congressman John Lewis when sitting on his desk is a bill to fix the Voting Rights Act after the Supreme Court Shelby v. Holder decision, which John Lewis fought for. John Lewis died with that bill sitting on McConnell's desk. And so all of these wonderful words about him, for me, mean nothing when they were unwilling when he was alive to do what was right. And we haven't just lost Congressman John Lewis. Yesterday, we also lost Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian, 95 years old, fierce fighter who was right there with him. In March, we lost Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowry. That's 273 collective years of knowledge that we have lost. 3 civil rights titans. And I was texting Eric Holder last night, and I sent him a photo. And it was a photo of John Lewis, Lowry, Vivian, and Andrew Young. And this is what he called them. He said, the second set of founding fathers. That puts into context what these men and the women who also fought, what really meant to us, black folks, but also this country.
And Nikole, you have actually, you've been writing about this. You've been writing about the reconsideration of American history. And not only do you sort of think about maybe a second set of founding fathers, but you go back before the first set of founding fathers to the role that African Americans have played in American history. And to this day, just last week, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, named your work specifically as a rewriting of history. John Lewis and others faced similar criticisms at the time that they are trying to change American history. Yesterday, Donald Trump talked about the threat to suburbs, the threat to people's way of life, the crime that's going to come into their neighborhoods if Joe Biden is elected. The language of oppression in 2020 sounds like the language of oppression in 1965 and 1963 and 1867 and 1776 and 1690.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of this amazing and revealing juxtaposition to have Mike Pompeo saying, how dare you argue that slavery is foundational to America, that racism is foundational to America, and then Trump goes live using the same racist dog whistles that we have heard since the founding of this country, and that he understands politically the only card he has left to play right now is anti-black racism. So it's interesting times that we're in, and I actually take it as a compliment when people say that the work that we're doing with the 1619 Project is revising history, because history has needed to be revised. We have needed to be more honest about what we are and who we are as a country, and few people understood that better than John Lewis. I have to second what Roland said. When I interviewed John Lewis in 2014 to commemorate Freedom Summer, which was the attempt to democratize Mississippi, as well as the country, he said that Shelby V. Holder made him want to cry, that all of the work that got his head bashed in was being undone. And so when we do have Republican congressmen who are offering their condolences and yet not standing up for the very rights that he fought for and put his life on the line for, it is hard to take that with sincerity. This has been the story of black people in this country, on this land, since the beginning. Is we have been the perfecters of this democracy. And as I say in the 1619 Project, as much democracy as we have has always been born on the backs of black resistance. And we still have black people fighting in the streets for that democracy now.
Roland, give us an evaluation of the world in which John Lewis succeeded as part of the civil rights movement and the freedom fighters and the things that happened in 1965 and the battles that are underway right now. Because while the proximate cause of the protests in the street right now are police brutality and police violence, which, by the way, existed back then, too, it is also economic injustice. It is unequal access to education. It is the criminal justice system. It is the same things that they were discussing in 1965.
Well, absolutely. While Nikole was talking, I immediately began to think about what Dr. King said in his speech April 3rd, 1968 at Mason Temple, when he said, be true to what you said on paper. And what black folks have been saying, what Lewis and Vivian and Lowry and Juanita Abernathy and Ralph Abernathy, Coretta Scott King, Septima Clark, Diane Nash, Harry Belafonte, we can go on and on. What they said is, America, be true to what you said on paper. Fulfill what you wrote. Don't just sit here and, like Trump, hug the flag and quote the Constitution and talk about what it means to be a real American if you are denying black folks the very thing a white person gets the moment they are born. And so here we are in 2020, 52 years after Dr. King's assassination. Here we are seeing these stalwarts, these lions, pass away, and we're still fighting for the very same thing because we have yet to be a nation that has provided black folks to be full American citizens. I am 51 years old. My nieces and nephews are the first generation of Martins born technically fully free. Yet we still have to sue when it comes to housing discrimination. You talked about what Donald Trump said. When you still see the rollback of civil rights in this administration, when you still see one of the first acts of the Republican Congress after he won was to roll back the protections for black folks when it came to getting auto loans. We're still dealing with that. And so the reality is, for black people, we've had to do exactly what Frederick Douglass said, that is agitate, agitate, agitate. Power concedes nothing without a demand. And I dare say to any person, if you're black or white or Latino or Asian, or just no matter who you are, if you truly want to honor John Lewis, you would absolutely mobilize and organize and register and vote and kick out the very people in Congress, in state capitals, in county commissioners court who are denying people their rights as Americans.
And Nikole, one of the last things that John Lewis said this very year, 60 years after the beginning of his fight for education rights and equal access and all of the things he fought for, in the end, it came down to one word: vote. He said we've got to vote in ways we've never voted before. So whether it's your work or his work or anybody else's work, it doesn't manifest if it doesn't manifest in the vote.
Yes, I mean, voting, of course, is huge. There's a reason why some of the bloodiest and deadliest battles of the civil rights movement were over the franchise. In this country in particular, we have defined citizenship by your ability to vote. If you are not able to vote, you are not a full citizen. That's why we punish people with taking away their right to vote. So he understood that voting is power. Voting determines who sits on juries. Voting determines both at the local and federal level what resources a community has, whether we will enforce civil rights law or not. But I think much more importantly, black people have voted at very high rates, particularly black women. Black women are voting at the highest rates of all groups right now. We also have to have politicians who are standing up for our right to vote, who are not making it more difficult for us to vote, because we are seeing waves of voter suppression, and that is what he was fighting against. Black people have had the right to vote since the 15th Amendment. What has not been so clear is our ability to exercise that right.
Thank you to both of you, and for the work that you continue to do. Roland Martin's the host and managing editor of Roland Martin Unfiltered, and Nikole Hannah-Jones is going to stick around for more conversation with us.